Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. I know it's the last session of the day, so let's get that wrapped up. My name is Chris Schlager. I'm the Director of Kernel and Operating System Development at AWS. And today, I actually have two friends that I brought with me to help me out. There's going to be Manan Gupta, our product manager for Amazon Linux, and then we have Nick Barber from Genesis, who will put in the customer side of this. So before we start, can I get a quick raise of hands for who is already using Amazon Linux? Okay, that is, yeah, okay, good, great. For those that aren't, you are still in the right session. We'll talk why you should. Next question. Who of you is using Amazon Linux 2023, the latest version? Okay, well, there's potential. Good. For those that aren't yet, we'll talk how you can do this. So stay tuned. We got a bunch of interesting stuff. Let's take a look at our agenda. So what is Amazon Linux? A quick introduction for those that didn't raise any hands. Why you should be using Amazon Linux. And then, as I mentioned, we have Nick over there coming on stage and talking about their experience at Genesis migrating from Amazon Linux 2 to Amazon Linux 2023. And finally, Manan will wrap it up with the roadmap update and talk about a bunch of things about Amazon Linux I'm sure you don't know yet. So stay tuned. OK, let's go on with what is Amazon Linux. For those that don't know yet, Amazon Linux is the operating system that we've created. It's a derivative of Linux, so it's not that different from any of the other Linux distros out there, specifically the Fedora, Red Hat-based ones, because that's where we originally started from. Over time, we have evolved that a little bit, primarily to tailor it to our specific needs and based on the feedback from customers that we have received. I'll go into a lot more detail. The first version was publicly launched in 2010. We call it just Amazon Linux. It didn't even have a version number. So by now, we have updated it to Amazon Linux 2. And about pretty much 2 years, well, in March, it will be 2 years, we have released Amazon Linux 2023, which is the latest version. It is a general purpose operating system, and probably not a surprise, given how long it's been around. It is the operating system that powers literally all of AWS these days. So why do we have yet another version of Linux? In general, we don't want to create yet another version, but we have very specific needs that we did not see really reflected by any of the other Linux distros. That doesn't mean you can't run them on AWS. In most cases, they do run fine. But we wanted a version that is really optimized to the max for our hardware and software infrastructure. So we have a large variety of EC2 instance types, for example, both bare metal as well as virtualized. And we want to make sure that when you launch Amazon Linux, that it is guaranteed the most optimized operating system for this particular instance type. Another focus that we have is obviously security. The internet is becoming more and more hostile these days. If you have an instance running or any workload that is connected to the internet, you should think about security. I'll dive into this a lot more. We wanted it to be very simple to maintain. And finally, we offer this at no cost, at least at no additional cost. Obviously, if you run an EC2 instance to use it, you have to pay for the EC2 instance. So I talked already about the optimization being one of the primary reasons why we created our own version. It is the default AMI that is being used when you launch an EC2 instance and do not specify any of the other operating system options. Obviously, there's thousands of AMIs you can choose from, but if you just run an instance without any further information, it will come up as an Amazon Linux instance using the latest version, in this case, Amazon Linux 2023. You will find that the kernel, the Linux kernel, the core of the operating system, is tailored towards that particular hardware that you are running on. And it's also not having a lot of other bulk coming with it. If you take the Linux kernel, currently it's, I guess, about 25 million lines of code. That's a lot of code. If you compile all that in, you get a very bloaty kernel. In our case, we know exactly what hardware and software configurations we have and what applications our customers are using. So we disabled everything that we do not think customers are going to use. The AMI that we are providing is then used by other AWS services like EKS and ECS, for example, and they essentially build on top of the images that we provide. So it's more or less the same, but obviously tailored for their specific services. And we also want to make sure that the operating system is well integrated with all the software and the hardware. We offer, so if we have certain services, then we try to have the right tools provided with it. I know there was a question. Sorry, we'll take questions all the way at the end since the session is being recorded. Thanks. Good. So, security. Obviously, everybody claims that their software is secure, but security is something that typically requires two distinct steps. Number one, you need to engineer it in a secure fashion. That gives you a secure system, but the moment it's done, it is already insecure because there's a constant flow of security vulnerabilities being discovered in software. Open source software is no different here. My team reviews a stream of probably about 300 or so CVEs each year. We'll get into some stats later on. That we are evaluating whether it's applicable, and if so, we release a patch as quickly as possible. The idea of not having code that could be vulnerable is one that we are obviously applying. So when we put together and create an Amazon Linux version, we make sure that we only put in the pieces that we think our customers need and the features, enable the features that they need, and everything else is actually turned off. So that when there is a vulnerability in that specific code that we don't use, then you're not affected. So that helps to reduce that attack surface. With SE Linux, we have a feature that allows you to add additional layers of in-depth defense. You can protect your applications better, and kernel life patching is a feature that we offer if you want to keep your machine running for longer than you should because you have a patch that you need to apply to the Linux kernel. You can hot patch that kernel. We do recommend it. It's supported in Amazon Linux for the few most recently released versions of the kernel that we have. This is not something that can get you over a year without ever rebooting. That's not what life patching is for. It gets you essentially a way to move your maintenance window for a few days or a week. Good. We provide bi-weekly security updates, and there's a bunch of kernel hardening features that we added as well. So, talked about the CVEs, the common vulnerabilities and exposure. This is a program that is primarily run by the US government that collects and manages all the reports of vulnerabilities. What you can see here is a bunch of stats for the CVEs that we evaluated and then fixed for Amazon Linux 2023. We have similar stats for the older versions. They are still maintained, specifically Amazon Linux 2. But for the purpose of this discussion here, I just wanted to show you some stats. As you can see, we are not only just patching everything. Patching is a process that creates work for us, and especially for all our internal and external customers. So when we release a security fix, we release it because we think it is relevant. if we have determined through our evaluation of the security vulnerability that our customers are not affected because we have specific mechanisms in place or the code is not there, it's in the source package of the open source package, but it's not enabled because we have turned it off, then we obviously don't have to release a security fix. So that's what the evaluation process is for, is a careful review whether we are affected and if the classification that the NIST or whoever created that classification, often the person that found the vulnerability, is actually applicable to us. Keep in mind that those are done for the generic case. In our case, if we have additional layers of security in place, something that is reported as an important or critical may just be a moderate or low because we have additional things in place. As you can see here, also, we are patching all categories, independent of whether it's important or critical. There are some distros that only do that. We are actually providing patches for mediums and lows as well. So, keeping it simple is important. Based on the feedback that we received from a lot of our customers, we are trying to make it the use of Amazon Linux as simple as possible. Now, obviously, Linux is a very complicated piece of software that's consisting of millions of lines of code. So simple in this case is not that everybody can use it, but we want to have it as easy as possible for an expert to put in their service. A new feature that we added with Amazon Linux 2023 is based on the feedback that we provided. It's called repository locking, or versioned repository sometimes. It's a mechanism that allows you to say, I want all my deployments, no matter when the host was provisioned or updated, to exactly match a certain state of the release. Since we do 2 weekly releases, you can say, I want to exactly have this release, which underwent my own QA and got sanctioned. So I want all my hosts to just run this software, no matter whether somebody types yum-update, yum-update-security, it will still get you just to up to that level. And that allows you to have your whole fleet on exactly the same software state. You can obviously then decide, okay, when you qualified the next release, okay, please now update, then you update to the next version, and then you have all the software from that next release. We have a very predictable maintenance set, as I said, every 2 weeks. We typically do an update. The exception here are criticals. As you saw on the previous slide, this year we were lucky. We hadn't had a single critical for Amazon Linux 2023. But if there is, we try to give it typically within 7 days. There are other mechanisms we have available inside of AWS, like the Patch Manager, SSM Patch Manager. If you want to maintain the status of your whole fleet, you can use that tool. We have integration with that. And on top of that, if you're a little bit more old school, if you prefer to batch things every quarter, I would not recommend that nowadays. But some companies want this a little bit more formal. We have a quarterly release that comes with more documentation that is literally accumulating all the updates we have done in that quarter to date. So that's also available. Good. Why should you use it? It's a general purpose operating system, as I said. But keep in mind, it's optimized for Amazon Linux, for the AWS hardware and software and services. We make open on-prem images available, so you can theoretically use it. It's obviously open source. We don't stop you from using it, but just keep in mind that the optimization was done for our hardware, our software. If you run it in a VMware VirtualBox, for example, or a KVM hypervisor on-prem, or take it to another cloud provider, that does work, but it may not be as optimized as it is for our hardware. Good. It is Fedora-based. We will continue to be Fedora-based. We do deviate because we have different release cycles. We match it to what fits our needs, and then we will go forward, provide you updates of Amazon Linux every 3 to 5 years. More details, stay tuned. Manan is going to cover that. The highlights for this year, if you haven't used it yet, we released the optimized images for the Elastic Container Service and the Kubernetes Service, EKS and ECS. We added or updated some software based on popular request. So as long as the OS is in maintenance, we will also look into version update. These typically come in addition to the previous version, or at least there's some overlap, and then you can decide when you switch. I would always encourage you, as soon as there is a new version available of a package, migrate as quickly as you can, because usually that old package will stop receiving security updates. Good. We made the deep learning images available, since now everybody is doing Gen AI and other cool stuff. We support those with Amazon Linux as well. And let's talk a little bit about the uptake we have seen. So when we released Amazon Linux 2023 in March 23, as the name suggests, we were really surprised by the uptake from the customers. As you can see here, we have more than 100,000 customers now using Amazon Linux 2023. Thank you all for the support there. And if you're not yet on Amazon Linux 2023, please take a listen now. Let me ask Nick to come on stage. He will talk about his experience migrating his company from AL2 to AL2023. Nick.
Thanks, Chris. All right. So, thanks, Chris. As Chris said, my name is Nicholas Barber. I'm the principal software engineer and senior manager for Genesis Cloud's infrastructure team within our platform engineering and developer experience group. So we all work on infrastructure in one way or another in the platform engineering group. My team just happens to touch on what is kind of considered the more traditional infrastructure, like DNS, networking, and base operating system automation. So we were given stewardship over that base AMI sometime in 2021, where in that base AMI is where all of our automation for our OS lives. You may call it your golden image or your base OS. Lots of companies have different names for it. But honestly, I've got to start with a little bit of a story about myself. And so as I was writing this presentation, it dawned on me that something about 19 years ago, I had my first internship through a vocational program at my high school. And one of my very first projects and one of my repeat projects was going clicky and creating base OS images and shipping them out to our school lab computers. So yeah, that's right. Old school OS deployment automation using Semantic Ghost, if anybody in the room remembers that kind of stuff. So, and what am I here to talk to you all about today? More modern automation and base OS automation and stuff like that. So I do need to touch a little bit on what Genesis is, what we do, and how we achieve our goals. And in a nutshell, Genesis creates communications platforms, contact centers. Genesis Cloud, as one of the products that we offer, is the one that I'm going to touch on. And it is a cloud-native, all-in-one contact center solution. More importantly, I'm going to touch on our scale. We have thousands of customers, not 100,000 like Chris, but we have something in the neighborhood of over 8,000 customers, servicing from over 100 countries. And but more than that, we have stiff compliance requirements that go along with our scale, right? We have customers ranging from retail to healthcare to state and federal entities. And these things combined can make for some really unique challenges in a really restrictive environment in which to work and write this automation. So one of the ways that we manage to solve this is to leverage immutable infrastructure paradigms and for hundreds of stateless microservices, and we treat them as cattle, not pets. We do have some stateful services that we also treat the instance in those cases as cattle, even if we do care about the data and we migrate that data over. But for the most part, our services are largely stateless. So today I'm going to be talking about Genesis Cloud's paradigms and a little bit about our pipeline to lend a bit of context. I'm going to talk about the challenges related to the scale and compliance that I mentioned and how we solve those challenges in our pipeline and how that pipeline helps us with things like an AL2023 migration, Amazon Linux 2023 migration. how we solve those. And finally, I'm going to go over the migration gotchas specific to Amazon Linux 2023. And that's what I'll end with, and I'll hand it off to Manon. So one thing I'm not going to talk about is I'm not going to talk about specifics in our AMI automation, like what tooling we use and whatnot. I'm going to cast just a high-level overview of what that pipeline kind of looks like at a very high level. And that's ultimately what we do to verify our OS migration is successful. We are currently in the middle of that migration, as you might imagine. It takes a while to migrate hundreds of microservices over to a new operating system. I also want to note really quick that this is all from the viewpoint of EC2 services specifically. Individual bundles of functionality at the EC2 level that do not leverage containers. So I also want to thank everybody here for coming to what is probably the only talk at reInvent that doesn't have anything to do with containers or AI machine learning. So as far as paradigms and pipelines are concerned, at Genesis, we treat development for operations as a paradigm, not a team, right? So an example of what that means is that we treat the base AMI much the same way that a customer-facing service team would treat their own service as a product to be consumed with contracts and interfaces and a surface on which to build. This also includes automated tests as a part of every single change. As platform engineers, we create an internal product suite that development teams use to deploy their services, and the base AMI is a part of that product. A service team's job is to build a resilient microservice that can aid in handling all of that communication stuff for the contact centers that we deliver to our customers. But the goal of the base AMI is to worry about all of the work in managing the underpinnings and configuration points to pass security and compliance scans, to maintain a certain performance baseline, and leverage our in-house tooling, right? We want to make the right way to do things the easy way to do things, right? The right way needs to be the path of least resistance for our developers. So we productize that effort, and we deliver, and we productize that effort into a deliverable that they leverage then, the service teams leverage then into their own pipelines. And so like if their security scans come back with vulnerabilities, then they can be reasonably sure that it's something that they added to the image, not necessarily something that we added to the image. And also want to cover that this is a team effort. Internal contributions are very common for our base AMI. In fact, when I say that we are the stewards of the base AMI at Genesis, that is very much the truth, right? We have the final say in what goes in, but oftentimes it's not us who actually wrote the automation. It's the service teams or other platform teams that have contributed to it in some way. So we have some interesting challenges that we face in Genesis Cloud that we solve through our pipeline. And I don't think we're terribly unique, and I want to cover what we do and how we accomplish it, right? So in short, we operate under an ephemeral and immutable infrastructure, as I mentioned before, and that means that when we snap a build artifact and ship it, it is unchanging from the build time to the time that it gets replaced by the next version. And with the exception that we do have some very minimal mutability at launch time to configure different observability applications, for example. And so like if you build something and ship it to dev, then it ships its logs to the dev log collector or the test log collector if it's being launched in dev and test. And so we have that little bit of mutability at runtime. So we do not patch in place. We have a maximum age requirement of about 30 days. For all of the EC2 services that run on our platform. Patches come with the newer versions of the base AMI as service teams adhere to their own 30-day deployment cadence and deploy new versions. But a pattern a lot of teams implement is to follow something more about half that, right? So they deploy about every 2 weeks in case something goes wrong in their deploy or in their tests. They have time to actually fix it, right? So, and what that means for us as platform engineers, and what that means for us as people who are building the base AMI, is that we have to be constantly releasing the base AMI every single day. It has to be a new one every day. And so we pull it in, we run patch updates, we run YUM updates, and dandified YUM updates for AL2023, DNF, and kind of go through that whole process every single day. So compliance is a big concern for Genesis Cloud, and I bet it's a big concern for a lot of the people in this room too. And like I said earlier, our customers range from retail to healthcare to federal entities, so PCI, HIPAA, FIPS, STIG, and lots of others I couldn't hope to memorize or rattle off right now. But those are all sources of work, sources of requirements that go into the base AMI. And so with all those requirements and all of those problems to solve, we have to make sure that when we go and we solve a new requirement, that we didn't break another requirement. And in order to do that, the best way that I've seen to do that is with an automated pipeline. So if you were to leverage an immutable pipeline for your base OS, it may look something like this. So you're going to launch the latest Amazon Linux 2023 AMI, or at least something reasonably up to date, right? It doesn't have to be bleeding edge, something, whatever the latest is that you're comfortable with. And then you're going to run your automation against that AMI, right? You're going to copy and run the base AMI automation, golden image automation, whatever it is. And then you've reached a milestone once that automation completes, right? And that milestone is the base AMI is created and it's ready to be consumed, right? Well, in a lot of pipelines, this is where it stops. This is where they say, all right, we're done, ship it, throw it over the wall. Well, it's not really the best idea. What we do is we actually take the base AMI that was just created. It's not available for use by our service teams yet, and we run our tests. So if we take a closer look at what those tests might look like, so we're going to launch like a really basic service, not quite a hello world, a little bit better than that, but we're going to launch a sort of archetypical service. We're going to install and verify critical runtimes. So we have a mixture of those across the board. So whatever those critical runtimes are, we're going to install those, run them, make sure they actually work. We're going to verify that the environment is known to the operating system and to any applications running on that operating system. Remember how I mentioned that if you deploy to dev, you need to ship your logs to the dev log collector. And if you deploy to test, you need to ship your logs to the test log collector. Well, that's where we verify that that's going to work, in the new image. And so that's the kind of thing that we start to build out the test for. And we're also going to verify different config variations. So for example, we're going to verify that a Java jar will run with various and certain like compliance tweaks that we know to be fragile or to be problematic. We're going to check certain config, or we're going to check certain connectivity as a litmus test, right? So we're going to check, we can talk to DynamoDB or SQS, right? Because like a lot of companies, we have common and shared libraries that might be affected by downstream changes or upstream changes. So we have to make sure that those kinds of things still work as a litmus test. But beyond that, we also have server hardening steps and CVE scans that happen here, and those tend to run in parallel. But once that happens and we have the functional and security tests complete, now we have an AMI that's done, and we have to also have a separate sort of release process, because now we have separated the actual creation of the AMI and the AMI being done as two different decision points. And so we have to have a separate release process, and just something that says, okay, it's released, and somewhere for the service teams to leverage and go and find it and grab it and use it. So moving on to like some lessons learned in our migrations, right? So Amazon Linux 2 to Amazon Linux 2023 is not our first. We actually started on Amazon Linux, and when we moved to Amazon Linux 2, we learned quite a bit, and we're applying those same lessons now between Amazon Linux 2 and 23. The first migration that we did was an effort that ultimately led to about a 2-year-long migration of all of our EC2 services just to get the work done, right? A lot of the effort, though, is less in the OS configuration and more about testing and verification of the service, the performance impact of the new operating system, and then right-sizing your clusters, right? So the testing effort led teams to rightfully treat the project as a pretty big undertaking. And when I say right-sizing our clusters, it's really important to keep that in mind, because even in the cloud where horizontal scaling is so accessible, it's still important that vertical scaling is understood, because you want to know that you're actually using what you're paying for. So to that end, a good way to stress test your system and verify functionality under load is extremely important for changes like this, where the behavior of the system should remain largely unchanged, but then you're pulling the rug out from underneath everything else and then putting a whole new rug underneath it. So at the time of the Amazon Linux 1 migration to the Amazon Linux 2 migration, we had very few functional tests to speak of, right? We didn't have that pipeline as robust as we do now. And really what we did was we would spot check archetypical services. We'd grab the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest service kind of thing that we could find, and we would find like some of the more complicated services and test both ends of that spectrum. And I'd say you'd probably catch about 80% of the things that are going to happen if you test just those two things. As if you don't have an automated pipeline, that's an option, right? But it's never going to be as good as an automated pipeline that has robust tests that you can trust. And if you don't have an automated pipeline, well, I'll butcher an old proverb to make my point for me. The best time to start was 10 years ago. The second best time to start is now. And so 2 pages that I would recommend to take a look at if you're doing a migration from Amazon Linux 2 to Amazon Linux 3, 2023 is to take a look at the deprecated for Amazon Linux 2 page in particular, because that's essentially like your breaking changes page, right? So what's deprecated in AL2 is going to be gone in Amazon Linux 2023. And then moving forward and keeping your eyes up on the track ahead is deprecated in Amazon Linux 2023. Those are the kinds of things that are going to be gone in Amazon Linux 2025 or 2027, whatever it ends up being. So some of the sharp edges that we ran into specific to the Amazon Linux 2023 migration and our own Venn diagram of sort of scale and compliance has to do, actually, the chief of which has to do with FIPS. So FIPS is the Federal Information Processing Standards, and 140-2 is the previous standard, and 140-3 is the new standard. It's kind of nice that they line up, you know, Amazon Linux 2, 140-2, Amazon Linux 2023, 140-3. So they do actually happen to line up in that way. Amazon Linux 2023 is 140-3 compliant, and it's under testing right now. So the kicker, though, is that classic load balancers and Amazon Linux 2023 in FIPS mode is effectively a non-starter. So classic load balancers do not support extended master secrets, which is a requirement in connections as defined by 140-3. And that's on the front end of a connection to a classic load balancer. So if you have a downstream dependency and you try to talk to that dependency with Amazon Linux 2023, operating in FIPS mode, that's a key point. Just out of the box, it'll work just fine. But if you turn on FIPS mode, it will fail with EMS not supported or EMS missing, like extended master secrets missing type errors. And then on the back end, you won't have matching cipher suites. So anybody who's not familiar with FIPS, I'll just cover that real quick. FIPS will it will dictate what cryptography you can use, and so it shortens that list dramatically. And so that's kind of the chief impact of FIPS in this context. So one thing to keep in mind also is to ensure that your security tooling is compatible. In our case, we use Amazon Inspector. Amazon Inspector v1 does not support Amazon Linux 2023, so we had to make sure that we moved to Amazon Inspector v2 before we could start our migration, so that we knew that the service was hardened and we didn't have any CVEs out there. IMDS v2 is required at launch time by default on Amazon Linux 2023, and what that means is that if you do not tell a launch command, whether it's CLI or your launch template or launch config, then to set IMDS v2 to optional, then it will just be set to required by default. Cron is not installed by default, and that one actually really surprised me. Cron has kind of been, ubiquitous in all versions of Linux forever. So it not being there by default was a surprise. You can still install it by DNF, but it's just not there by default, and that's indicative, I think, of a movement within either the Red Hat community or maybe the Linux community as a whole. I never really found like a hard answer on it, but in my own research articles that I read, a lot of Linux distros are kind of moving towards using systemd timers over cron. Worth mentioning too is that EPEL is not directly supported in Amazon Linux 2023. Now I will say that this has actually been much less impactful than I thought it would. The packages that are available for Amazon Linux 2023 are pretty robust. It's a pretty long list. Only one set of packages with regards to testing and virtualization of like different hardware was impactful to us, but we're able to compile that and then use it. So not really a huge deal there, but just something to keep in mind. Nice hurdle to trip over if you're not aware of it. Also, keep your libraries up to date in general. It's something that Chris touched on with regards to like CVEs, but just in general, this kind of ties back to the classic load balancers and like FIPS in general and like new compliance requirements. If you just keep things up to date, there tends to be less sharp edges to cut yourself on. So just to recap, let's just break this down to 3 key points here. Different pipelines are going to have different problems to solve, right? So our base AMI versus our service teams pipeline is an example of just this within Genesis. And think about other pipelines that you know of and frame them similarly. And even if you don't say that you don't have a pipeline, I would challenge that you probably do, right? Because from your developer's fingertips to production, whatever that process is to go from developer's fingertips to production, that's your pipeline, whether it's automated or not. Strong fundamental testing at the OS level and verifying that things work before they even reach the service team is incredibly helpful in these kinds of migrations. even if you don't have an internal distinction that mirrors platform versus service teams like we do, this same advice is still going to apply. If you don't already have a way to verify your OS is valid and configured correctly at the time of an update, then you're already starting this kind of migration off on your back foot. If it's automated, great. If it's an Excel spreadsheet with a checklist, that's not ideal, but it's a method, right? It's still a list of tests that somebody is running. And I've said it twice already, but I'll say it again. Keep your systems reasonably up to date. You don't need to be on the bleeding edge, but staying up to date is just good security practices in general. But also I wanted to call out to understand where your dependencies come from and how old they are all the way down. And this goes for black box applications too, maybe even especially. If you happen to have a long list of requirements, like a lot of businesses do, a long list of compliance requirements, like a lot of businesses do, then you will find that sometimes they can create a very restrictive environment in which to work, and just keeping things up to date tends to make that a little bit easier. So that's about all I have to talk about, and hopefully some of the gotchas and challenges will resonate with you, and if you don't have an automated pipeline, it's always a good time to start one. So thanks. I will turn it over to Manan. There you go, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick, for sharing those insights about how you're using Amazon Linux, managing your pipeline, and your experience upgrading to AL2023. I'm sure those tips will be helpful for our other customers. Now, I want to share some roadmap updates. First, let's talk about AL2. We launched AL2 in December 2017, so almost 7 years back. And it has been the most popular Amazon Linux distribution. Most AWS customers have used AL2 either directly on EC2 or through EKS or ECS. And last year, we launched AL2023, which is our latest, most secure version of Amazon Linux. And today, a majority of our customers are either using Amazon Linux 2023 or are in the process of upgrading to AL2023. But we have received feedback from some customers that they need a little bit more time to be able to complete their AL2023 upgrade. And as Nick shared, there's work to test your applications, ensure all dependencies are addressed, security tooling is compatible, and that your compliance requirements are met. And while customers complete their upgrade, we want to ensure that your existing AL2 systems are secure. And therefore, we have decided to extend support for AL2 for 1 more year, from June 30th, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. There will be no additional cost for this support extension. And during that 1-year extension period, customers will get security updates and critical bug fixes. Now, something to keep in mind is that if in case there might be certain packages that are simply not feasible to be supported and updated and maintained. And in that case, we will update our documentation and send out notifications to our customers. We hope that this extension will give you the time that you need to upgrade your systems to AL2023. And since Chris has said it only twice, I'm going to say I want to emphasize that it's really important that you upgrade your systems to AL2023. The details of the new end of support date, as well as what is covered by our upgrade, will be updated in our documentation in the coming weeks. So next, I want to talk about AL2023, and there are a few updates that we are making to the broader Amazon Linux lifecycle based on feedback that we've received from customers, especially since the AL2023 launch last year. For AL2023, we have 2 support phases. We have a standard support and a maintenance support phase. And during standard support, we release quarterly updates. And these quarterly minor version updates include new features, new packages, new versions of existing select packages, as well as security updates and bug fixes. And in the maintenance support phase, we provide security updates and critical bug fixes as and when they become available. In order to give our customers more stability for running their workloads on AL2023, we will provide standard support on AL2023 until June 30th, 2027. And this will be followed by 2 years of maintenance support, which brings the AL2023 end of support date to June 30th, 2029. The goal here is to be able to provide you with the stability and the support that you need to confidently upgrade your workloads to AL2023. If you are a customer that is running AL2 today, and if you were planning to skip AL2023 and upgrade directly to AL2025, then we recommend that you do not wait and instead migrate to AL2023. We will give customers at least 12 months notice before we launch the next major version of Amazon Linux so that you have sufficient time to plan your migration to that next major version. This means that there will be no AL2025. However, customers that still want access to the latest packages and features, and with our quarterly version updates, we'll continue to provide all of those as well as newer kernel versions. Now, as more customers have onboarded onto AL2023, we have been asked to add more packages to be supported out of the box in our distro. In many cases, customers have chosen to build these packages from source, but we are trying to address the most popular package requests wherever it is feasible to add a package to the core distro, with the primary consideration being the impact to our security posture. Since launch, we've added about 200 packages to AL2023 through our quarterly updates, and we will continue to do so in future releases. Some of the popular requested packages that we've added in just the last 2 minor versions include OpenVPN, FreeIPA, NetPlan, and .NET 8. You can find the details of which packages are getting added in our release notes. If you go to our documentation, you'll find the section on Amazon Linux 2023 release notes, which has all of the details of our quarterly releases. And within each of those releases, as Chris mentioned, we have roughly new updates every 2 weeks. So you will find at that granularity all of the details of what's getting added in every version that is being released. So as an example, this was the first release of the 2023.6 version that we launched, and you can see the new packages that are getting added and the comparison with previous versions. If there are packages that you need in AL2023, please continue to send feedback through GitHub or your AWS account managers. In some cases, customers will need to build these packages from source while we are evaluating, in case it's taking some time for us to onboard it onto our distro. But we are evaluating all those requests and prioritizing it on the roadmap. In some cases, if we are not able to onboard a package into our distro, then we will provide you with the reasoning as to why we are not able to do so, and we can work on alternate options. Some of the package requests that are in active consideration by the team include mod.melon, LDP agent, PAM radius, as well as a bunch of packages that are required to support a graphical desktop. Many of our customers require FIPS compliance for their workloads. FIPS, as most of you are aware, are standards and guidelines for data protection and encryption for federal systems, and they specify the security requirements for cryptographic modules that protect sensitive information. And these standards can and are often applied even beyond federal systems as best practice more broadly in the private sector as well. For AL2, We have crypto modules that are mentioned in this slide. We have 5 modules that have full validation based on the 140-2 standards. As you can see, the OpenSSL is already in historical status as of October, and the remaining 4 will move into historical status over the next 10 to 12 months. Therefore, it's important that as these modules go into historical status, you continue working with your compliance teams to understand your options to use these FIPS-validated modules in historical status for existing and new systems. One of the options would be to use the AL2023 cryptographic modules, and these have been submitted for the FIPS 140-3 validation. The kernel cryptographic API module has already received interim validation, and the remaining 4 modules are on the module in process or the MIP list. The MIP list contains the cryptographic modules that have completed all of the FIPS testing and are awaiting the CMVP, which is the cryptographic module validation program review and the issuance of the certificate. You can follow the steps in our documentation on how to enable FIPS mode in AL2023, and we recommend that you, again, work with your compliance team to determine if these AL2023 crypto modules in their MIP status can be used and are acceptable by your organization, and how to obtain the required approvals. So those are the main roadmap updates. I want to emphasize that we are continuing to invest in making Amazon Linux the most secure and performant operating system for running your workloads on AWS. Please continue working with your teams to upgrade to AL2023, and reach out to us if you need any help or if you have any feedback or questions. Thank you.